Namaste and welcome to today's session. So, what do we begin with? I have something in mind that I want to talk about today. Let's see if we get around to talking about that. So, let's start off with a sitting practice. It's always good to do a sitting practice to bring our attention and awareness back into the only place where life exists, which is the present moment. And it's the easiest thing to do because it requires us to really do nothing, mm, which perhaps is also the most difficult things for human beings to do. I remember a quote. I think there's this French philosopher, Blaise Pascal, if I'm not mistaken, whose quote is, all the problems of man, and I'm assuming he's also including women in that, or a better way of saying it, all the problems of human beings is because um, humans don't know how to sit in a room all by themselves, which means we are constantly in the state of, perpetually in the state of wanting to do something, become something, change something, make something better. But there's one thing that we can't seem to do is just be as we are. And he says that's all the problems of human beings are is because of that. And I often wonder, like, if we can't tolerate our own company, then we seem to be just imposing our company on other people. So at least we must befriend our own self, which means befriend our own company, befriend our own presence, befriend our own existence, learn to be comfortable with our own existence. And then once we are able to befriend ourselves, perhaps our presence will not be an imposition on other people, but it will also be a friendly, positive vibe that we give across, which comes from our own state of being comfortable in our own skin, if I may put it. A better way would be being comfortable in our own existence, in our own being. So the practice of sitting practice is essentially uh, to get us back in touch with ourselves. And I think some people also may have difficulty sometimes, because they're not used to just sitting and then close their eyes and just be, and the mind keeps racing. So you could see what works also for you. Maybe for some people, going for a walk and being in nature really does the trick for them. It helps to quieten the mind. And quite often, when you come to a place which has nature, which has just the trees and the vegetation and the mountains, and then suddenly you come across silence. And this is a silence which you can't really experience when you're in the hustle bustle of a city or a township. There's always some noise going on. And suddenly, when you come across this silence, and the silence kind of hits you, you become aware of the lack of silence going on in your mind, which means nothing but the thoughts which are constantly running in our mind. So sometimes it's just good to be close to nature, retreat, mm, uh, take time out from your busy life and come into the mountains. And Dharamkot is a good place. If you happen to be coming here, then do meet me if you can. So I think that's one way, for just take some time out. And even if you are in the city, then perhaps you can find some pockets. Like, since I'm from Bombay, you could go to the beach. You could go to Sanjay Gandhi National Park, the national park. So you could always find some place where you can just retreat and just be and get in touch with nature. And that helps. The other thing which also helps to get into a state of meditativeness, which is nothing but another word for getting in touch with your own existence, is creativity. For some people, that really works. So recently, I mean, just now I came across some workshop happening here in Dharamkot over Saturday, Sunday, which is about mindfulness and art. Uh, so when you're doing something creative, it could be painting, it could be gardening, it could be cooking, it could be, the creativity has so many forms. Uh, and ideally something where you are using your body, I think that would be great. Like I have a studio near where I stay. It's a pottery studio. That's a great way to sort of use your hands and get in touch with the earth and the smell and all of that. So I think that is another way that one can sort of come into awareness, come into mindfulness, which you would probably, it's difficult when you're working on an Excel sheet. Your mind is so, the left part of our brain is so predominant, and that is generally most human beings are using the left part of our brain. I'm reminded of some speaker, I forgot his name. He said most of our education, what it does is that it takes all our energy from our body and puts it only in our head. And that too only on the left side of our head, which is the left brain. Because if you look at our education, it's all about memorizing, reasoning, logic, analysis, most conventional education. I'm sure education has also evolved over the years, but there's very little impetus or focus on physical development, social development, emotional development, creative development. There's so many aspects. The focus is only on on sort of, logic. Logic is really become very, very most important thing. So creativity helps us to sort of balance and get in touch with the right side of our brain, which is associated with creativity, emotional intelligence, and all of that. So whenever you get a chance, whatever be your form of creativity, just engage and pursue that. And you need not also have to create great art, actually. Come to think of it, it's not something that you have to create, like you'll say, oh, I'm not a good artist. No, this is not about being a good artist. It's just about, you could just take some paper and then just do some simple coloring, sketching, whatever. I'm just giving an example. And or just do something abstract. But I think the very fact that you are working with doing something creative, it will sort of focus your mind, or it will absorb you, and then you get into that state of meditativeness and that state of oneness, which is also good. So yes, sitting practice is perhaps the most conventional way people think about meditation or meditative, being meditative, which is sitting still, close your eyes. But for some people, it's difficult. Then nature is definitely one way that you can explore that silence. And the other way is through creativity. Are there any other ways that one can? I don't know. I mean, like if you know something, then do let me know. Right now, only these are coming to my mind. And yeah, and I think also, I think if I may add, it's really important that you have a healthy lifestyle if you want to experience a state of oneness, a state of presence, which means you need to ensure you're getting adequate sleep. Mm. You need to ensure that you are having the right food. You are having the food, not only the good quality. I mean, when I say right food, I'm talking about simple sattvic food, not too oily, not too stale, not too processed. And the other thing is that, yeah, and also your consumption is not just food. Your consumption is also to do with what you are reading, what you are what's the company you're keeping, what are the conversations you're having, what are you watching, because all of that is becoming food for the mind, and that's generating thoughts. So having a healthy lifestyle, a sattvic lifestyle, if may put it, is conducive, because what will happen is that if you don't have a sattvic lifestyle, then either, and there are these three modes, the gunas, I'm sure most people who are in yoga would know that: sattva, rajas, tamas. That uh, tamas is the dull energy, which kind of moves us towards dullness and lethargy. So if you're not having good sleep, you'll feel dull and lethargic during the, often, people tend to doze off when they're doing a sitting practice, because the tamas is very predominant, or you have overeaten. That also makes you dull and lethargic. So then that that becomes an obstacle, that becomes an impediment to just being. Or on the other hand is the rajasic energy, which is like, supposing if you have had very rich oily food, very spicy food, or you are watching very maybe violent movies, rajasic stuff, and you're in the kind of very aggressive company. Corporates can be very aggressive, by the way. So that also makes you very, your mind is constantly on an edge, and we must probably know people who are constantly in this action mode, doing mode, hyper, so to speak. And that, so as far as possible, just have a simple, healthy, balanced lifestyle. Nothing, um, I'm not really recommending extraordinary changes. Just sleep on time, eat the right food, have it in the right quantity. Don't expose yourself unnecessary to literature or movies or things which kind of then leave a sort of an impression on our mind. And that's really what I want to talk about today, which is about impressions. So, so I think that sort of helps us to also ensure that we have a balance. And I think another very important thing, which perhaps could also be relationships, um, invest in relationships that make us feel good and balanced, and maybe learn to also draw boundaries in relationship which are, which take away, which deplete our energy, which create a lot of unnecessary conflict and stress. Uh, and perhaps sometimes it's just important to, you know, limit your interaction with such people, where you don't feel good interacting with these people. And maybe over a period of time, also, what happens is we outgrow certain people, we outgrow certain communities. And while we can't change our family, and but we can always, choose how much we want to engage with somebody or not. And so, one, as you grow, I think one needs to exercise that choice, that, who are the kind of people I want to associate with, who are the people. And sometimes I think it's also good to, if you are on the path of beingness and oneness, it's good to have ample time to yourself, so that you can practice this presence. Because when you're constantly interacting, engaging, socializing, you could be talking about spirituality, and you can, but it's really not presence. Presence does require you to spend time and just be. Whether you're closing your eyes, whether your eyes are open, but it's really me. It's like getting in touch with the feeling of your own existence, getting in touch with being, getting in touch with presence, which essentially means um, taking away your mind from this constant chatter and coming and just being in a state of witnessing your, I can't even say your, it's just witnessing presence, witnessing being. And when you're in that state of witnessing, there's really not like, if you really look at, when we talk, we say, I am seeing this, or I'm seeing a mountain. There is a subject, there's an action, which is a verb, which is seeing. and there's an object. I'm seeing a book, and this is pretty much 99% of the time, which is how we are functioning. There's a subject, there's an action, there's a verb. There's a object. But when we are in that state of being, we sort of this subject, action, verb, subject, verb, object, this gets deleted because this comes primarily from our thinking mind. Because when we see things from the filter of our mind and our thoughts, we create this subject, verb, and object, and we fragment the one world into pieces. So when we are in that state of just being, we are simply witnessing. There is no subject. There is no that subject is doing something, and there is no object. There is just the silence in which whatever is happening is happening. Like if you close your eyes and you just observe, the breath is happening. The sensations are happening. It is not like I am watching the breath. You see the difference? As opposed to the breath is happening. Now, it's also a way for me to explain the breath is happening. But really, when we are just simply witnessing, we notice that we notice whatever is happening. So, uh, so that distinction between subject, verb, and object, that goes away. So that's the uh, so we, as the more we are able to come into that state of witnessing, that state of being, the closer we come towards our trueness, our natural state. Uh, whatever different words is difficult to describe it, but at least best I can say, the more we disassociate from this mind-made conceptual identity of ours. So, like if I were to recapitulate, spend more time in a state of meditativeness. What can help you? Sitting practices, which generally people call meditation. I would say meditation is just nothing but the act of simply self-observation, if one may say it, whatever that may be happening, and spending time with nature. I think that helps. Doing something creative, and all these things are it's more easier to be meditative when you have a sattvic lifestyle, which means simple, balanced, holistic lifestyle, getting good sleep, eating the right quantity of food, the right kind of food, uh, ensuring that your company is right, ensuring that what are you reading and seeing and watching, all that is, sort of aids the practice. So, so that's what I didn't intend to talk about this, but this just sort of happened. So anyway, so let's get down to the practice, and then we'll talk about something else which is perhaps related to this. Okay, so sit comfortably wherever you are, and take a nice long deep breath in and exhale. Another nice long deep breath in and exhale. Bring your attention to your breath. Just observe the movement of the breath as you inhale, as you exhale. Also observe that when you're in a state of witnessing, it's not like you are inhaling and you are exhaling. The inhalation process and the exhalation process are happening by themselves. Bring awareness to the sensations in the body. Imagine as though there is this empty space in which this body is existing. And this empty space is taking note of the breath, the sensations, the sounds. Everything is happening in this infinite empty space. You are this empty, infinite space without any location. Whatever happens, happens in this emptiness. The thoughts appear in emptiness. The sounds appear in emptiness. The sensations appear in emptiness. The breath appears in emptiness. The feeling of being alive, being conscious, also appears in emptiness. Everything that appears in emptiness is transient, temporary, passing. The emptiness itself is constant. The nature of emptiness is silence, awareness. Just remain and keep your attention in that state of silent awareness. Just be. Silent, aware, present, conscious, if there are thoughts, let them come, let them go. They appear in the silent emptiness and they go in silent emptiness. These thoughts have nothing to do with you. Everything appears in this silence emptiness, and everything goes in silent emptiness. Remember, even after we come out of the sitting practice, we can get in touch with this silent, aware, conscious part of our existence at any time we wish, by simply taking a pause and coming back into awareness. Take a deep breath in and exhale. Another deep breath in and exhale. Slowly and gently, at your own time, at your own pace, you can gently rub your palms and cup your eyes. Okay, so welcome back. We had a short sitting practice, but I hope it's helpful to come back into awareness. And one of the reasons I integrate or have this portion of the session as a sitting practice is because I think no matter how much we talk and how many concepts that we have, which is essentially talking and sharing and all of that, I think what's more primary is to constantly get in touch with that silent awareness. That's far more important than I think talking and listening, and which both has its purpose, but I think that's really very, very primary. And also it's something that, you know, there, like I keep saying, there are teachers who would just be silent. There's nothing more, nothing really to say. Sometimes they're just the silence exudes and speaks far more than the words. But uh, but if I keep silent for about an hour, I don't know how many people are going to watch these videos. Uh, Maybe at some point there are teachers who I have seen some of the videos where uh, there's a lady guru. I don't think she's alive anymore, perhaps, but her whole video is 1 hour of she's just sitting and she's just silent. She's not saying anything. So anyway, so until I reach that level of awareness where I can just be silent for an hour, and you would still find the video interesting. Until then, we'll talk about something. So what I want to talk about today is um, the mind and the tendencies of the mind. One of the things that I was mentioning about uh, whatever we hear, whatever we watch, whatever we conversations we have, whatever we do, is leaving an impression in us, and that impression then creates thoughts. So, often all of us are very differently wired. We all have different proclivities, different likes, different dislikes, different mental frameworks, different way we see things, different habits, uh, different patterns, mental patterns, which essentially, if you look at it from the perspective of psychology, it would be called a personality. This is what a personality is. Now, where does this personality emerge from? One could, of course, say part of it is genetic, that we get it from our parents, and part of it is nurturing, that nature and nurture, that through our conditioning, and we are told about, um, uh, we take on certain beliefs and ideas, so that forms our personality. But if you were to look at it more deeply, and I will look at, we will speak about this both from a yogic perspective and also from a neuroscience perspective, and both are saying the same thing in using different language. Every time an action is done, now that action can be at three levels. At the most gross level is an action that you do with your using your limbs. At a less gross level, it is an action where you say something. And at the most subtlest level, it's an action where a thought happens. So there are three kinds of action. One is something that you do physically. Um, at the middle level is you say something. At the most subtlest level is just a thought. Everything that is done is leaving an impression on our, one could say, if I were to use uh, the language of neuroscience, then perhaps it is leaving an impression on our brain, mm, an imprint in our brain. And if I were to use the language of yoga, it's leaving an impression on our consciousness. Or if I were to use the language, real language of yoga, then chitta. That's the word that they use. That it's leaving an impression on our consciousness, on our chitta. So so every action is sort of creating certain impressions on us. And these are not just memories are something that you recall using your mind. It's almost like an energetic print. I think that's a good word. It's an energetic print that every action is leaving on us. And um, and this energetic print, like supposing if you sort of, if I were to give you an example, my favorite example is of gulab jamun. Like, let's say you've never tasted a gulab jamun, and the first time you taste a gulab jamun and you really like it. It's nice, and then you want to have another gulab jamun. And then every time you pass by a shop which has gulab jamuns, you want to have and over a period of time, what's happening is you are creating a gulab jamun samskara impression on you, which means that now even the thought of gulab jamun will start making you salivate, that you feel. So that impulse, that energetic print of, you know, gulab jamun, the action of having a gulab jamun gets formed. And that is how habits tend to get formed. Now, if I were to again use the language of neuroscience, a neural pathway is getting created in our brain because neuroscience says our brain it has neuroplasticity, which means every time we do an action, a neural pathway gets formed. If I were to use the language of yoga, then a samskara is getting formed. And the deeper that samskara or the impression is, then that becomes a vasana. It's like a deep rooted tendency of the mind. So, except yoga goes, the spirituality, and if you especially look at Eastern religions, whether it is Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism, most of these religions talk about past lives, and they say that this is not just this life, but you're carrying these impressions from previous lives, and it's just that the software has taken on, with its impression bank, has taken on a new hardware, a new body. And then um, right since childhood we are born with these tendencies which can get actual, which once the right conditions are there, then they sort of fructify. So leave aside the fact, okay, whether you believe in previous birth or reincarnation, let's not get into that. But even if we were to look at it simply, even from our experience, we can realize that every time we are doing an action and repeating an action, it's becoming a habit. And that is how good habits are formed, and that is how bad habits are also formed. So samskaras are not necessarily all bad. They're also good impressions as well. Like somebody may have a good habit of getting up early in the morning, maybe that's, and going for a walk or doing something which is constructive. Now that's also a good samskara. So why I'm talking about this is because of two reasons. First and foremost, most people do not even realize or understand how this mind, how impressionable the mind is. It's like, if I were to give an example, it's like wet clay. Every time something happens or action happens, an impression is getting formed, energetic print is getting formed. Uh, so, and nobody in our school education talks anything about the mind. We use the mind for all our education, but nobody's educating us about the mind itself, of how this mind functions, and how we can cultivate a better mind, so to speak. And at another level, we can also talk about how we can transcend the mind. So leave around transcending the mind or going beyond the mind, but to simply even understand how this mind functions. And if I were to talk from my own personal experience, there have been so many, I mean, destructive, I wouldn't say so many, but there were some destructive tendencies that I had, which I didn't even know that these are these are tendencies. These are how the mind is functioning. Like if I were to share about one of my habits that I had, uh, which was to watch pornography. And as a child, everyone experiences, dabbles with pornography and all of that. Most people do, most boys tend to. And then over a period of time, it becomes a habit, it becomes a pattern. It becomes an impulse that you can't sort of free yourself. And for the longest time, I never even realized that this is an impulse which is controlling me, and I have no control over this impulse. Huh? I thought, like, fine, it's everyone is does that, and that's also one of the problems with impulses and tendencies and habits. Is quite often most of these impulses and tendencies are invisible. One does not see them as impulses over which we have no control. Like, I think pornography, sex addiction is it's a huge, it's a pandemic, but nobody, in fact, in psychiatry, I don't even think sex addiction is listed as one of the addictions. Food addiction. People use food to sort of feel good, and that's another addiction. So there are so many kind of, and I'm using the word addiction because addiction is nothing but a impulse over which we have no control. The impulse comes, it's like an electrical charge, and then suddenly it makes us do something. And primarily, that whatever that action is, that impulse is trying to give us some immediate gratification. That is the start of an addiction process. That is the start of mm, a forming of an impression and a vasana that goes deeper and deeper. So most of us have tendencies and impulses over which we have no the simplest thing could be the mobile phone. We're constantly checking the mobile phone. Oh, now one would say that no, this is not an, but it's an impulse, constantly wanting to check the mobile phone. Social media, now that could be another impulse. So there are so many, I mean, the conventional ways when we look at addiction, of course, we say smoking, drinking, drugs, but then there are, the mind is nothing but a series of tendencies and impulses over which we have very little control. And this is, and those impulses, if they are, they can propel you towards something good, which is in terms of good habits, is also it's an impulse that has been created, or it could be a something negative and destructive, which depletes your energy, which comes in the way of your functionality, which comes in the way of you being constructive, which comes in the way of being meditative. Hmm. So the first part is to just simply make us aware that these tendencies of the mind, these habits of the mind, these addictive patterns of the mind, and I'm talking generally about the negative impulses, the destructive impulses, and then destructive addictions, mm, that we are not even aware of them. We often try to justify these impulses. No, 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 I'm just social drinker. Oh, everyone is doing this. I'm reminded of one quote by J. Krishnamurti. He says, to be well adjusted in a sick society is not a sign of good health. Okay, so if everyone is doing it, doesn't mean that it is normal, or it is not an impulse you have no control. Like I somebody met, and then he was saying that, okay, so this is something, when sometimes people have difficulty in being committed in a relationship, and I'm talking physical intimacy, and they often say that, oh, look, I believe in free love. Oh, I believe in open relationship. I am not the kind who, I believe in freedom. I am not the kind who wants to be committed. And there's another word called polyamory. mm, That, I'm polyamorous. Okay, it's possible that this, I'm not condemning that that's not possible, but it is also a possibility. I'm just offering it as a way of simply, for someone to explore that it's an impulse that I can't seem to control, that I want to sort of engage with more people in a intimate way, and it's an impulse which I have no control over. So why can't I use the word I'm promiscuous, or I am addictive to this impulse of constantly wanting intimacy with different people? Because this does not make us look good. But when we say, oh, free love, polyamory, all this makes us so, the point, what I'm really pointing to is, till the time we are sort of justifying our impulses, till the time we are in denial of our impulses, till the time we are not really looking at that these are impulses I have no control over, it's very difficult to then move beyond those impulses. So then we are caught up in that impulse, and then finally the impulse does whatever it has to do. So one is to become aware that there are impulses, that this is how the mind functions. And this is not a moral judgment that this is good, this is bad, this is nothing to do with anything like morality. It's more to do with sort of taking your energy to a higher, what do I say? It's like water. Like, if I were to give an example. Now, water, the nature of water is to flow. The water can flow into a gutter, or the water can flow in, be collected into a water body or a water tank, and can be used for, you know, washing clothes, drinking, or whatever. Or the water can flow and become the big wide sea or the ocean and give whole life to the planet. So similarly, we are nothing but bundles of energy. Now, what you want to do with your energy is up to you. Now, if you want to waste your energy through gratification and impulsive habits, it's fine. Or you can use and channelize that energy for something which is more creative. Or you can use and channelize that energy for um, being meditative, practicing silence, practicing awareness. So it is not a moral judgment on anybody. It is, what are you doing with your energy? Do you want to waste it? If I were to use the chakras, you want to waste it from your lower chakras, which is all about the pleasure center, or you want to move it towards creativity, service, or you want to sort of use it for self-realization. So what do you want to do with your? So the first step is to become aware that this is how the mind functions. This is how the tendencies get formed in the mind. The second step is to be honest that I have certain impulses and I have no control over these impulses, especially the ones uh, which waste my energy, which are not helpful for my growth, or whatever that may be. I think that is a very, very important point to realize that, and one need not say, I am an addict, but at least one can say, the mind, that this mind has an addictive pattern towards the sexual impulse. The mind has addictive pattern towards a food impulse. So you need not define yourself that I am addicted. Even if you go to this 12-step program, which is mostly associated with alcohol, the addiction, the first step is they say, you have to say, I am addicted. That's the first step. So the point I'm trying to say, the first step is emotional honesty. One has to be honest that I have this tendency, and then you can want to do something about it. Because unless you do not realize that I have this tendency of the mind, I have this so-called weak neural pathway, or I have this samskara or this vasana, then you can't move beyond it. So once that realization happens, then what? Now, what do we do next? So what can be done next is, and this again I'm sharing from my own personal experience and also what the literature, the science says, is that one needs to channelize your energy into something which will give you the same. It's like, why are we getting into immediate? We are getting into immediate gratification is because somehow we don't have an outlet for something which is more creative, which is more sustainable, which is more wholesome. I think that's the word. So hence we get into all these small pleasures and gratification and all of that. So one needs to change the direction. Now, if I were to use the language of neuroscience, one has to create a new neural pathway so that the old neural pathway becomes dormant. I generally show a video around this, but I'm not doing that right now. Another way of putting it in the way of yogic language, one needs to create new samskaras so the old samskaras become dormant, which means one needs to find a new way, a new community, a new creative outlet where you can channelize your mental, emotional energy and you can get your positive hormones, your dopamine rush, your endorphins, all of that, not from this destructive impulse, but through creativity, but by doing something which is wholesome. Mm. And then your need to get the dopamine and endorphins and all the positive hormones from this activity will reduce because you're getting it from this. And when you're in that state of transitioning, or mm, simply put, cultivating better habits, it is good to stay away from anything that will trigger the old impulse, which is, if you're addicted to watching pornography, then you should stay away from what maybe at night you should keep away your phone, you should not browse, uh, or if you're addicted to having junk food, then avoid purchasing junk food in the first place and keeping anything in the fridge, otherwise you'll be tempted. Or if you're addicted to, let's say, alcohol, then you should stop hanging around with your buddies who are, so you should avoid those triggers and focus your energy in something which engages you more. It is basically, there's a quote by Khalil Gibran that, I'm not getting the exact quote, but basically, when you can't get the fresh waters, the reason you drink stale and stagnant water, which is the addictive impulses, is because you can't get the fresh waters of creativity. And that's not really the quote, but that's the essence of it. So if we can get fresh water through creative outlet, through a positive company, through maybe waking up in the morning, I think that's a great habit. If you can cultivate, then the whole day goes very is quite a, then you will not look for the rush from these other things. So and what I want to point is that initially there may seem an element of effort involved in this, and it may seem like you're disciplining, but whenever you are sort of when you're able to see that this impulse, this tendency of the mind, this samskara, this vasana of the mind is not healthy for me, and you're using that discrimination, again, the yogic language is viveka, you're using that discrimination to consciously cultivate or your or to channelize the mental emotional energy in a positive, creative, healthy outlet, then that's not suppression, because you're using your discrimination. You're not suppression is when you're trying to forcefully trying to curb an impulse because you feel someone is forcing you, you feel guilty about it, you feel ashamed about it. This is not about guilt, this is not about shame, this is not anyone telling you. It is just your viveka and your discrimination that you realize this is not healthy for me, this is a wastage of my energy, this does not uplift me, uplift my energy, and I need to move towards something which is wholesome, towards um, uplifting my energy. Then you're not doing it out of a sense of suppression, it is coming out of discrimination. And there may be times that you may slip up. uh, Ideally, it's good if you can continue, which is why it's the importance of sort of a positive environment, a positive community, or something which sort of, you know, like for me, I think there was a time in my life where I was so closely associated with the Yoga Institute and the community of the Yoga Institute. And that was a great support system for me to channelize my mental, emotional energy in teaching and yoga and all of that. And that was really helpful for me at that point of time. So if you can create that support system and, change the environment, the point I'm trying to say, the environment plays a great role in sort of enhancing your ability to move towards more wholesomeness. I think that's what I'm trying to say. The environment is extremely important. So to whatever extent you can bring changes in your environment, the people you're in, where you're working or whatever, then that can be extremely helpful. So one need not feel guilty or feel even if there is a lapse. If it's like the example that I give is, fine, if you fall off the bike, fine, then you come back on the bike and then you start riding the bike all over again. You don't judge yourself, you don't feel guilty about it, you don't feel ashamed about something. So the whole journey is about moving towards greater awareness, understanding how the mind functions. It creates neural pathways, every action, samskaras, vasanas get formed, tendencies get formed, every action mm, contributes to that. Quite often, we are not even aware of our tendencies and impulses because we are in a constant state of denial, rationalizing, explanation, all of that. And that keeps us in the grip of that impulse, in the bondage of that impulse. The journey towards freedom from that impulse comes when we are emotionally honest, when we are willing to accept and acknowledge to ourselves that we have an impulse and we don't have a control over this impulse. And there is no new labels that we can give. No, I am this, I am that. No, it's an impulse. I have no control over that impulse. And in simple language, it's a addictive pattern of behavior. It's a tendency. And there could also be emotional tendencies. I've just given you emotional tendency could be constantly getting into relationships, or constantly wanting validation, or so many, all kinds of impulses are there. And then trying through the discrimination, through the realization that I want to move towards a more wholesome life, towards uplifting my own energy, I consciously try to change my environment. I change the mental emotional energy, move towards doing something more creative, where I can get my positive hormones from, and consciously do that. And last but not the least, in all of this, I think what is really, really more important is that the more awareness we can cultivate, the more helpful it is. And why do I say that? Because impulse is nothing but like a, it's like a, every time you get that impulse to do something, which could be an anger impulse, it could be an impulse for um, mm, overeating, it could be, it's like the greater awareness you have, you will recognize that impulse faster. And as soon as you recognize that impulse, if you can move that direction of that energy from that impulse to something else, then you can, it's like your awareness can really, really help you to free of these tendencies of the habits and of the mind, which are not really wholesome. So the greater we practice awareness, which is what I was talking at the beginning of this session, either through sitting practice, either through being with nature, either through doing some creative outlet. Or yeah, the other thing which I forgot about, how you can practice meditativeness, is also physical exercise. Sometimes that's really helpful. Do some kind of a physical exercise sport that can also help you to get in touch with the state of meditativeness. If that's something, dance, that can also help you to get in touch with meditativeness. Maybe practicing yoga, that can help you. So whatever helps you to move towards more meditativeness, I think that one should pursue that as much as you can. The final goal is to realize, if there is a final goal, that I'm not all these tendencies of the mind. I am that silence awareness, which is watching whatever this mind is doing. And yet there is a part, there is my dimension which is linked to the mind and the body. I cannot say I am just silent awareness and the mind and body will disappear. The mind and body is there, and it is based on certain mental habits, certain patterns, certain impressions, certain vasanas, samskaras. The more I'm able to manage these through whatever I have spoken about, cultivating a good environment, channelizing energy, the more I will be able to move in alignment with what my natural self is, which is awareness. So, last but not the least, this is something that is not enforced. It comes out of self-realization. I think that's really so the purpose of this is to make you realize. Most people may not even realize that they have impulses which they don't have control, or they may be struggling with impulses. So this is maybe to make you realize, make you aware, and maybe give you some tips that can help you to work through those impulses. So if you have anything you want to share, feel free to write and ask, or just share. So on that note, we end this session about tendencies of the mind, how these tendencies get created and how we can work through these tendencies. And in neuroscience, these tendencies are called neural pathways, one may say, and in yogic literature, they are called samskaras and vasanas. Okay, so on that note, let's end today's session with a small prayer. can close your eyes if you wish, join your palms in Namaste if you wish. My dear higher self, help me to realize and acknowledge impulses, tendencies, impressions, samskaras, vasanas of the mind, over which I have very little control. Help me to move this energy from a space of wastefulness, gratification, towards channelizing it towards creativity, self awareness, self realization. Help me not to judge myself. Help me not to feel guilty, not to feel ashamed about any of my impulses. Help me to see it from the eyes of discrimination, of what is good for me, what is healthy for me, what is wholesome for me. Help me, support me with the right community, with the right environment that is conducive for my growth and self development. I seek your grace and guidance to realize my true self. Om Shanti Shanti. Okay, so with that, we end today's session. Goodbye, God bless, and take care.